The morning of March 15th, 2025, started like any other day at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. Security guard Marcus Thompson made his routine rounds through the great mausoleum, checking locks and monitoring the sacred halls where legends rest in eternal peace. The sun barely pierced through the stained glass windows, casting colorful shadows across the polished marble floors. Marcus had worked this shift for 12 years, and nothing ever happened. Nothing ever changed. The silence was always the same, respectful, heavy, absolute. But today would shatter that silence forever. As Marcus approached the Holy Terror section where Michael Jackson had been laid to rest 16 years earlier, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The security seal on the ornate bronze door leading to the King of Pop's resting place had been broken. Not just broken, carefully removed, as if someone with intimate knowledge of the security systems had gained access. His hands trembled as he reached for his radio, his mind racing through impossible scenarios. Who could have done this? How did they bypass the cameras, the motion sensors, the guard station at every entrance? Within 20 minutes, the mausoleum transformed into a crime scene. Police officers cordoned off the entire wing. FBI agents arrived in black SUVs, their faces grim and determined. The Jackson family received emergency calls that sent them rushing from their homes, hearts pounding with fear and confusion. What had been taken? Had someone desecrated Michael's final resting place? The questions multiplied with each passing moment, spreading through the gathered crowd like wildfire through dry grass. Detective Sarah Chen led the investigation team into the sealed chamber. Her 20 years with the Los Angeles Police Department had prepared her for many things, but nothing could have prepared her for what she found inside. The coffin itself remained undisturbed, perfectly positioned on its marble pedestal, surrounded by flowers that the family replaced weekly. The security footage showed no forced entry, no shadowy figures, no explanation for the broken seal. It was as if the chamber had opened itself, as if something inside had called out to be discovered. Then Detective Chen noticed it. A small envelope resting on top of the bronze casket, placed with deliberate care in the exact center. The envelope was made of thick, expensive paper, aged yellow with time, sealed with red wax that bore an unfamiliar symbol. Her gloved hands picked it up carefully, turning it over to reveal a single word written in elegant script: truth. The weight of that single word hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Every person in that chamber felt the shift, the sense that they stood on the edge of something monumental. The envelope seal proved impossible to trace. The paper dated back to the early 2000s, confirmed by forensic analysis, but the handwriting matched no database, no known sample from Michael's life or career. Inside, they found a handwritten letter and a small brass key attached to a faded blue ribbon. The letter, written in Michael's own hand, verified by 3 independent experts, contained instructions that seemed impossible. It directed them to a hidden compartment built into the base of the coffin itself, a compartment that official records claimed did not exist. The letter's opening line sent chills through everyone who read it. If you're reading this, then the time has finally come for the world to know what really happened. The Jackson family arrived as Detective Chen briefed her captain. Paris Jackson, Michael's daughter, pushed through the crowd of officials, her face pale but determined. She had spent years defending her father's legacy, fighting tabloids and conspiracy theories, trying to preserve the memory of the man who sang her to sleep and taught her to see magic in the ordinary. Now she stood before his coffin, reading his words from beyond the grave, and felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Whatever truth her father had hidden, whatever secret he protected even in death, was about to emerge. The world would never be the same. Neither would she. Her hand reached out, trembling, toward the brass key that would unlock mysteries 16 years in the making. The moment stretched into eternity, and then she turned the key. The brass key slid into a lock so perfectly concealed that even the coffin's manufacturers swore it didn't exist. Paris Jackson's hand shook as she turned it, hearing the soft click that echoed through the chamber like a gunshot in the silence. Detective Chen placed a steadying hand on the young woman's shoulder, but Paris barely felt it. Her entire focus narrowed to the small panel that had appeared in the bronze base, sliding open with a whisper of metal against metal. Inside the hidden compartment lay a single object wrapped in black velvet cloth, undisturbed by time or moisture, preserved as carefully as an ancient artifact. Prince Jackson joined his sister, and together they lifted the bundle from its resting place. The weight surprised them, heavier than they expected, dense with significance beyond its physical mass. As Paris carefully unwrapped the velvet, gasps filled the chamber. Inside lay a journal bound in dark leather, its pages thick and yellowed, filled with Michael's distinctive handwriting. But this was no ordinary diary. Pressed between the pages were photographs never released to the public, legal documents bearing signatures of some of the most powerful people in the entertainment industry, and audio cassette tapes labeled with dates spanning from 1993 to 2009, the year Michael died. Detective Chen immediately recognized the implications. This wasn't just a personal journal. This was evidence. Evidence of what, exactly, remained unclear, but the dates alone told a story of their own. They corresponded to the most controversial periods of Michael's life, the allegations, the trials, the media circus that had consumed his final decades. As Paris turned the pages, tears streaming down her face, one thing became absolutely clear. Her father had documented everything. Every conversation, every threat, every moment of the nightmare that had pursued him until his death. He had kept receipts, as they say, and now those receipts would finally see daylight. The first entry they read aloud sent shockwaves through everyone present. Michael's words, written in his own hand on June 5, 1993, described a meeting with powerful music industry executives who had made demands that turned his stomach. They wanted control, total, absolute control over his catalog, his image, his future earnings. When he refused, they made it clear that refusing them came with consequences. They told me they could destroy me, Michael had written. They said they owned the media, owned the narrative, owned everything that mattered. They said if I didn't sign over my masters, they would make sure the world turned against me. I thought they were bluffing. God help me, I thought they were bluffing. The entries that followed painted a picture so disturbing that several officers had to step outside for air. Michael detailed how negative stories began appearing in tabloids within weeks of that meeting. He described photographers who seemed to know his every move, journalists who twisted his words before he even spoke them, and a systematic campaign to portray him as something monstrous. But most chilling were his accounts of the allegations themselves, how he'd been approached multiple times by people claiming to represent families who needed money, who would go away quietly if he simply paid them off. When he refused on principle, insisting he'd done nothing wrong, the accusations went public. The journal contained names, dozens of them, along with documented payments, recorded phone calls, and sworn statements from witnesses who claimed they'd been pressured to lie, threatened into silence, or paid to disappear. Michael had been methodical, almost obsessive, in his documentation. He'd known that one day he might need proof, might need to defend himself beyond the courtroom. He'd created an insurance policy, hidden it away, and left instructions for its discovery only after his death. Only when he could no longer be harmed, when the truth couldn't be used as leverage against him or his children. Paris found a letter addressed directly to her, written just days before her father's death. Her voice broke as she read it aloud. My dearest Paris, if you're reading this, then I am gone. I pray you never have to open this chamber, that the past stays buried where it belongs. But if the time comes, if they try to rewrite history or use my name for their own purposes, then you must know the truth. I was not perfect, but I was not what they claimed. I was a man who loved music, who loved his children, and who made powerful enemies by refusing to be controlled. Show the world these pages. Let them judge for themselves. I'm so sorry you have to carry this burden, but you're strong enough. You've always been strong enough. Love, Daddy. The weight of that letter settled over the room like a physical thing. This wasn't just about Michael Jackson anymore. This was about an industry, a system, a machine that chewed up artists and spit out whatever version served its purposes. The journal contained evidence that could implicate dozens of powerful individuals, could reopen cases long considered closed, could fundamentally alter how the world understood one of its biggest stars. Detective Chen knew immediately that this evidence would need federal protection. Within hours, the chamber would be sealed again, the journal taken into custody, and a media firestorm will begin that would make every previous scandal look like a gentle breeze. But first, they had to listen to the tapes. Paris clutched one labeled Final Insurance, June 24, 2009, recorded just one day before her father's death. Her hands trembled as she held it up to the light, seeing her father's handwriting on the label, imagining him alone in his room, knowing something terrible was coming, leaving one last message for whoever would find it. The truth was here, preserved in magnetic tape and fading ink, waiting 16 years to emerge. As Detective Chen produced an old cassette player from the evidence kit, everyone in that chamber understood that the next few minutes would change everything. The secrets were about to speak. The cassette player clicked to life with a software that seemed impossibly loud in the tense silence. Detective Chen adjusted the volume as static crackled through the speaker, then cleared into the unmistakable voice of Michael Jackson. But this wasn't the breathy, gentle voice the world knew from interviews. This voice was exhausted, frightened, and desperately urgent. Paris gripped her brother Prince's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. They were about to hear their father speak from beyond the grave, and nothing could have prepared them for what he was about to say. Today is June 24th, 2009. Michael's voice began, each word measured and deliberate. If anyone is listening to this, it means I'm gone. It means they finally got to me. I'm making this recording as insurance, as proof, as my final testimony. My name is Michael Joseph Jackson, and I am not crazy. I am not paranoid. I am in danger, and I need the world to know why. He paused, and they could hear him breathing, gathering courage for what came next. For the past 16 years, I have been targeted by a group of people who want my catalog, my legacy, and ultimately my silence. This tape documents their final attempt to control me. The recording continued with Michael describing events from the weeks before his death. He talked about the This Is It concert series, how he'd been pressured into performing despite his reservations about his health and readiness. He named his doctor, Conrad Murray, but his words suggested that Murray was just one piece of a larger puzzle. They told me I needed to do these shows, Michael explained, his voice growing strained. Said I owed too much money, that my reputation needed rehabilitation, that this was my only chance. But I know what they really want. They want me to fail. They want me to collapse on stage or cancel at the last minute so they can declare me unreliable, incompetent, unable to manage my own affairs. Then they can step in, take control of everything I built. What followed was even more disturbing. Michael detailed conversations with music industry executives who had made veiled threats about his children's safety. He described feeling watched constantly, finding his medications tampered with, and experiencing symptoms that his regular doctors couldn't explain. I've told my family I'm scared, he said, and the raw vulnerability in his voice made Paris sob openly. But I don't think they understand how serious this is. They think I'm being dramatic, that the stress is making me imagine things. But I'm not imagining the people following me. I'm not imagining the pressure to take medications I don't want. I'm not imagining the lawyers who keep showing up with contracts that would sign away my children's inheritance. The tape cut to another recording, this one a phone conversation Michael had recorded with his permission. The voice on the other end was cold, businesslike, threatening. Mr. Jackson, you're making this very difficult. We've been patient, but our patience has limits. You will do these concerts. You will sign the revised agreements. And if you continue to resist, we'll have no choice but to take other measures. Think about your children, Michael. Think about their futures. Think about what might happen if you're not around to protect them. Detective Chen's face had gone pale. This wasn't just evidence of industry manipulation. This was evidence of conspiracy, possibly conspiracy to commit murder. She immediately called for backup, for federal agents, for district attorneys who could handle a case of this magnitude. But the tape wasn't finished. Michael's voice returned, now speaking directly to his children in a way that shattered every heart in that chamber. Paris, Prince, Blanket, if you're hearing this, then I couldn't protect myself. But I tried to protect you. I tried to leave you the truth so you wouldn't spend your lives wondering, so you wouldn't believe the lies they'll tell about me after I'm gone. I want you to know that everything I did, every strange decision, every time I seemed crazy or paranoid to the world, was because I was fighting. Fighting to keep our family together. Fighting to keep my music mine. Fighting to make sure that when I was gone, you would have something real, something they couldn't take away. The recording spanned hours. Michael had documented meetings, phone calls, threats both subtle and explicit. He'd recorded doctors discussing medications without his knowledge, lawyers plotting legal strategies to declare him incompetent, and business managers calculating how much his death would be worth versus how much his life was costing them. Each revelation was more shocking than the last, building a case that Michael Jackson hadn't simply died from an overdose administered by a negligent doctor. He'd been systematically undermined, isolated, and ultimately eliminated by people who stood to profit from his death. Prince Jackson, who had remained stoic through most of the proceedings, finally broke. "They killed him," he said, his voice raw with grief and rage. "All these years, we've been told it was an accident, that Dr. Murray made a mistake. But they killed him. It was planned. It was murder." Detective Chen couldn't disagree. The evidence before them suggested a conspiracy far larger than anyone had imagined, one that had successfully disguised a murder as medical malpractice for 16 years. But the final recording was the most damning. Michael's last words on tape, recorded in the early hours of June 24th, just over 24 hours before his death. "I don't think I'm going to make it through this. I can feel it. Something is wrong. My body doesn't feel like my own anymore. If something happens to me, please investigate everyone around me right now. Follow the money. See who benefits from my death. Don't let them win. Don't let them take my music, my message, my children's inheritance. Fight for the truth. Please, someone, fight for the truth." The cassette player clicked off. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by Paris's quiet weeping. Every person in that chamber had just heard a dead man predict his own murder and name his likely killers. The journal provided names and documentation. The tapes provided motive and method. Together, they formed a case that would reopen investigations, destroy careers, and potentially send powerful people to prison. But they also raised an even more disturbing question. If Michael had all this evidence, why didn't he go public while he was alive? What was he so afraid of that he chose to hide the truth until after his death? The answer to that question was still buried in the journal, waiting to be discovered in entries they hadn't yet read. And that answer would prove the most shocking revelation of all. Detective Chen spent the next 48 hours organizing the most complex investigation of her career. The journal and tapes had been secured in federal custody, copies made under armed guard, experts brought in to verify authenticity. But even as the evidence was processed through official channels, the story leaked. It always does. By the morning of March 17th, every news outlet in the world was reporting the discovery at Forest Lawn. Social media exploded with theories, demand for justice, and hashtags that trended globally within minutes. The Jackson family found themselves besieged by reporters, their grief complicated by the knowledge that their private pain was now public spectacle. Paris and Prince decided to hold a press conference. Against the advice of lawyers and family members who urged caution, they stood before cameras and told the world what they'd discovered. Paris, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face, held up a photograph from the journal. Her father with his arms around his children, smiling genuinely for perhaps the last time. "My father was murdered," she said clearly, letting the words fall like stones into still water. "We have evidence. We have recordings. We have the truth he died protecting. And we will not stop until everyone responsible is held accountable." The impact was immediate and catastrophic for those named in Michael's documents. Within hours, subpoenas were being issued. Entertainment executives who had spent decades building empires suddenly found their offices raided by federal agents. Lawyers scrambled to defend clients whose names appeared again and again in Michael's meticulous records. Stock prices plummeted for companies implicated in the conspiracy. The entire structure of the music industry seemed to shake on its foundations as the scope of Michael's allegations became clear. But Michael's journal revealed something even more disturbing than a conspiracy to control one artist. As investigators dug deeper into the entries, patterns emerged. Michael hadn't been the only target. His documentation included references to other artists who had died young, who had struggled with addiction, who had been destroyed by scandals that seemed to appear from nowhere. He'd compiled a list of musicians who had fought against industry control and paid devastating prices, financially, professionally, personally. Some were dead. Some had disappeared from public life entirely. Some had given in and handed over their catalogs, their creative control, their freedom. The journal entry from September 15th, 2007, spelled it out explicitly. "I finally understand the pattern. They don't just target the difficult artists or the valuable catalogs. They target anyone who might inspire others to resist. They make examples of us. They destroy us publicly so that every young artist coming up sees what happens when you don't play by their rules. It's not about money anymore. They have more money than God. It's about power. It's about control. It's about making sure that nobody, no matter how talented or beloved, is bigger than the system itself. Detective Chen brought in forensic accountants who traced money flows through dozens of shell corporations and offshore accounts. They found patterns of payments that coincided with negative media coverage, with allegations that appeared and disappeared, with legal troubles that seemed to emerge whenever an artist pushed back against contractual obligations. They found evidence of surveillance, of information-gathering operations that would make intelligence agencies proud, of systematic campaigns to manipulate public opinion and legal proceedings. The conspiracy Michael had documented wasn't just about him. It was about maintaining an entire system of exploitation. The pushback came swift and brutal. Lawyers for the implicated parties filed injunctions to suppress the evidence, claiming it violated privacy rights and defamed innocent people. Conservative media outlets questioned the authenticity of the recordings, suggesting the Jackson family had fabricated evidence to restore Michael's reputation. Editorials appeared in major newspapers warning against rushing to judgment, reminding readers that Michael had been a controversial figure with legitimate questions about his behavior. The machine Michael had described in his journal roared to life, attempting to control this narrative just as it had controlled so many others. But something was different this time. The evidence was too solid, too extensive, too well documented to be dismissed. Independent audio experts confirmed the recordings were authentic and unaltered. Handwriting analysts verified every page of the journal. Former employees of the implicated companies began coming forward with their own stories, their own evidence, their own testimonies about practices they'd witnessed but been too afraid to report. A dam had broken, and truth poured through in a flood that no amount of legal maneuvering could stop. 3 days after the press conference, the first arrest was made. A music industry executive named in Michael's journal was charged with conspiracy, racketeering, and obstruction of justice. Others followed. By the end of the week, 7 people had been arrested, dozens more subpoenaed, and investigations opened into the deaths of 3 other artists whose names appeared in Michael's documentation. The FBI announced a task force dedicated specifically to investigating corruption in the entertainment industry. Congress scheduled hearings. The United Nations even issued a statement about the need to protect artists' rights globally. But the most significant development came from an unexpected source. A lawyer who had represented several of Michael's accusers over the years requested a private meeting with the Jackson family. What he revealed in that meeting would finally explain why Michael had hidden the truth for so long, why he hadn't fought back while he was alive, why he'd chosen to expose a conspiracy only after his death. The answer was both heartbreaking and infuriating. They'd had leverage over him. They'd threatened not just his career or his reputation, but something far more precious, his children. The lawyer, his conscience apparently unable to bear the weight any longer, brought his own evidence. Recordings of conversations where Michael's legal opponents had explicitly discussed using custody threats to force his compliance. Documents showing planned media campaigns designed to portray Michael as an unfit parent. Letters that outlined strategies to have his children removed from his care if he didn't cooperate with their demands. Michael had faced an impossible choice: fight back and risk losing his children, or submit and hope to protect them. He'd chosen submission, documenting everything in secret, creating a dead man switch that would only activate when they could no longer threaten what he loved most. Paris listened to this explanation with a face like stone. When the lawyer finished, she asked one question: who else knew? Who else in your firm, in the industry, in the system knew what was being done to my father and said nothing? The lawyer had no answer. The silence spoke volumes. The conspiracy wasn't just about the people who actively participated. It was about the hundreds of people who knew something was wrong but chose career over conscience, profit over principle, complicity over courage. Michael hadn't just been fighting powerful individuals. He'd been fighting an entire culture of silent acceptance, of looking the other way, of telling themselves that this was just how the business worked. Now that culture stood exposed and condemned. 6 months after the discovery at Forest Lawn Memorial Park, the world had fundamentally changed. The trials began in September 2025, broadcast live to global audiences that numbered in the billions. Every major figure named in Michael Jackson's journal faced justice in courtrooms packed with journalists, activists, and family members of other artists who had been destroyed by the same system. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimonies damning, and the verdicts came down like hammers of justice too long delayed. The first conviction came on October 3rd. A music executive who had threatened Michael repeatedly, who had orchestrated media campaigns to destroy his reputation, who had profited enormously from his death, found guilty on 17 counts, including conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and obstruction of justice. The sentence, 30 years to life. He stood stunned as the verdict was read, unable to believe that consequences had finally caught up with power. But they had. More convictions followed weekly, each one dismantling another piece of the machine Michael had described. Dr. Conrad Murray, already convicted of involuntary manslaughter in 2011, faced new charges in light of the evidence. The tapes revealed that he hadn't acted alone, that he'd been pressured, paid, and ultimately used as a fall guy for a larger conspiracy. While this didn't absolve him of responsibility for Michael's death, it complicated the narrative significantly. During his new trial, Murray finally told the complete truth. He'd been contacted months before Michael's death by people who had specific instructions about medications, dosages, and timing. He'd been promised protection, payment, and a guaranteed light sentence if anything went wrong. He'd believed them. He'd been a fool. The impact rippled far beyond the courtroom. 3 major entertainment companies faced bankruptcy as lawsuits from artists, both living and deceased estates, flooded the legal system. The practice of artist contracts came under federal scrutiny, with new laws proposed to prevent the kind of predatory agreements that had trapped Michael and countless others. Universities began teaching the Jackson case in ethics classes, using it as a definitive example of systemic corruption and the cost of silence. His story became a rallying cry for artists' rights worldwide. Paris Jackson transformed her grief into activism. She established the Michael Jackson Truth Foundation, dedicated to supporting artists fighting for control of their work and protecting young performers from exploitation. Her speeches at universities, industry conferences, and congressional hearings were powerful and uncompromising. She spoke about growing up without her father, about the lies she'd been forced to hear about him, about the relief and rage of finally knowing the truth. "My father died protecting his children and his art," she said at one particularly moving testimony. "He died because he refused to let them win. The least we can do is make sure his death meant something." The journal itself became historical evidence, preserved in the Library of Congress as a document of cultural and legal significance. Scholars analyzed it for insights into creative genius under siege, into psychology of persecution, into the mechanisms of power in American entertainment. Michael's words, once hidden in a bronze coffin, now taught in classrooms and cited in legal briefs. His final act of documentation had become his most influential work, changing policies and perspectives more profoundly than any song ever could. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural. The case forced society to confront uncomfortable questions about complicity, about the price of entertainment, about who pays when we demand perfection from our artists while feeding them to systems that view them as commodities. The hashtag that emerged from the revelation, Justice for Michael, evolved into a broader movement questioning how we treat creative people, how we consume their art, and what responsibility audiences bear for the machines that destroy those who entertain them. On June 25th, 2026, 17 years after Michael's death, Paris and Prince returned to Forest Lawn. The chamber had been resealed, the coffin restored to its peaceful rest, but everything had changed. They placed flowers on their father's resting place, white lilies, his favorite, and stood in silence. The truth had been revealed. Justice had been served. But it couldn't bring him back. It couldn't give them one more conversation, one more hug, one more chance to tell him they understood now, that they knew he'd been fighting for them all along. "Do you think he knew?" Prince asked quietly, his voice echoing softly off marble walls. "Do you think he knew that hiding the truth until after he died was the only way it would actually come out? That people would only believe him if he couldn't benefit from being believed?" Paris considered this, tears streaming freely down her face. "I think he hoped," she said finally. "I think he hoped that we were strong enough to carry this forward, that the truth was powerful enough to survive, and that eventually people would care more about justice and about protecting their comfortable lives. He was right about that. At least, he was right about us." They stayed until sunset, watching light fade through stained glass, remembering the man behind the myth, the father behind the legend, the human being who had been consumed by forces he couldn't defeat alone, but had left weapons for others to wield. Michael Jackson's final gift to the world wasn't a song or a dance move or a revolutionary album. It was a truth, documented with painful precision, hidden with strategic genius, revealed at the perfect moment to actually matter. As Paris and Prince walked out of the mausoleum that evening, something had shifted in them both. The grief remained, would always remain, but it was balanced now by purpose. Their father had spent his life entertaining millions, had died protecting his children, and had orchestrated from beyond the grave the exposure corruption that would change an entire industry. His legacy was no longer just music. It was justice. It was change. It was proof that even power eventually answers to truth. The mysterious object found inside Michael Jackson's coffin had sparked global debate, reopened closed cases, destroyed corrupt empires, and freed future generations of artists from predatory systems. That object, a journal, some tapes, a lifetime of careful documentation, had been Michael's insurance policy, his final performance, his last great gift to a world that had loved him, hated him, used him, and ultimately killed him. The truth had emerged exactly as he'd planned, exactly when it needed to, in exactly the way it would have maximum impact. Even in death, Michael Jackson had outmaneuvered those who thought they controlled the narrative. The debate about his life, his death, and his legacy would continue for generations. But now that debate would be informed by facts rather than fiction, by evidence rather than tabloid speculation, by his own words rather than the carefully constructed lies of those who profited from his destruction. The mysterious object had revealed the truth, and the truth, as it always does eventually, had set everyone free, everyone except those who had built their empires on lies. For them, the truth brought only justice, long delayed but finally, inevitably, inescapably delivered.